Marijuana, the dried leaves and flowers of the Indian hempweed, is used in the form of a cigarette. Marijuana smoking, experts point out, can make a helpless addict of its victim within weeks, causing physical and moral ruin and death. Should you ever be confronted with the temptation of taking that first puff of a marijuana cigarette, don't do it.
One of the most remarkable aspects about cannabis is that the plant itself contains hundreds and hundreds of different compounds, many of which are likely to have therapeutic value. Now, mostly we focus on THC, which is, of course, the component of cannabis that makes you stoned. But there's another very important component called cannabidiol. But cannabidiol itself is also a relaxant drug. It's recently been shown to reduce anxiety. It may also promote sleep.
Early man began to use psychoactive potions. In the cave paintings, you can see the signs of an altered state of consciousness.
Initially, of course, agent people didn't have any understanding of things like THC, chemical molecules, these types of things, their effects on the brain. And the effects of plants like cannabis, opium, coca, mushrooms, cacti were all generally seen as magical effects that came to them through the gods.
So cannabis has a very broad range of actions, and it's been around for 4,000 years, so it's not surprising that its utility has been widely experienced and widely tested. It was very popular with Queen Victoria in England in the 1800s. She used it to treat period pains. She used it to treat the pain of childbirth. And in fact, it was a legal medicine in Britain until 1971. And then when young people started using it, it was banned.
I certainly think we have made mistakes in penalizing people for medicinal use. We saw some cases that were absolutely ludicrous, people who were raising it for those purposes, who've been directed to use it. So I think we should open up this whole can of worms. And I would hope that the Justice Department could work with this committee and work with members of Congress and other advocates as to how better to assess the use of marijuana.
Can they come up with even one positive thing as a result of prohibition of marijuana? And if they start saying, oh, it's to keep the drugs away from our children, they're wrong. It's easier for our young people to get marijuana than alcohol. If they're going to say, well, we're going to reduce violence, we're going to perpetuate the rule of law, they're wrong. It's doing the absolute opposite. 60% of all of the drug cartels' profits in Mexico come from the sale of marijuana, with all of the drug-related violence that goes down there. It isn't the drugs that are causing the harm, it's the drug money. The federal government officials say this all the time. There's no study showing that marijuana is an effective medicine, and you know something? They're right. However, it's beyond hypocrisy for them because it's the federal government that controls the marijuana, and numbers of reputable groups, the Centers for Disease Control, the University of California, and others have requested to conduct the studies, and they've been deprived of that authorization.
So there's no research because the government hasn't allowed the research?
The government affirmatively does not allow this research to take place, and then they sanctimoniously say, well, there's no research that shows it. It's beyond hypocrisy. I view it as chutzpah.
Cannabis is less harmful to the health than alcohol or tobacco. And therefore, it is completely out of order that it should be in this high prohibited category.
Tobacco, to the best of my knowledge, is the only substance that we sell in the United States that, when used as directed, causes death.
Right, absolutely.
Shouldn't we be incorporating tobacco into our drug policies?
No, certainly.
And that argues more and more for it being a public health issue rather than a criminal issue.
I think the ultimate threat of these substances when it comes to modern society is their ability to break consensus trance and throw people into looking at things in a novel new way. Society went through a massive upheaval. There was a sexual revolution. People started protesting wars. And the government themselves directly saw a relation between this and drug use, particularly cannabis use.
Every one of the bastards that are out for legalizing marijuana. Most of them are psychiatrists, honestly. All the great psychiatrists are Jewish. By God, we are going to get the marijuana thing. And I want to get it right up square and close. I want to find a way to put more on that, or somebody else can do that. Yep. I want to get it against legalizing all that sort of thing.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions.
Ronald Reagan, for instance, and his son Ronald Reagan Jr. in an interview when questioned about his mother Nancy's Just Say No campaign and his father's support for the war on drugs, said in relation to marijuana, it's not marijuana, the mildly mind-altering substance. It's marijuana, the antithesis of the state.
At the time, I had no reason to believe that there was anything sinister going on.
This estate looks like a nice place to raise a family, but this seemingly safe suburb was hiding a dangerous secret. Police finding 5 cannabis grow houses on 2 neighbouring streets.
I'm a bit scared.
Chelsea and her family live in the area, but are now moving out solely because of the drug raid.
I've got rental agreements. I'm going to find another place to live.
Yeah, cannabis has had a rough time over the last century or so. And one of the real problems I think we have now is that medicinal cannabis is only available in some countries, still not available in the United Kingdom, and that's a serious loss and it's a detriment to many of our patients.
We've done research on the different constituents in cannabis. THC, which gets you high, CBD, which is an amazing compound which is antipsychotic, anti-anxiolytic, anti-diabetic. It's a very good compound. It's been grown out of the crop because the crop has been modified and grown so that it has as high THC as possible. It's a tragedy that our youth can only get that type of cannabis, more or less.
There's a lot to be learned about that, and I think it can be a real problem for kids using it in a way that doesn't have that kind of set and setting.
There's a lot of learned knowledge which can more easily be passed on in a regulated system.
On one hand, we decry the scourge of drug abuse. On the other hand, we say that, you should take drugs instead of dealing with a behavioral problem, instead of implementing novel things such as parenting. Kids are a behavioral problem, so they can be medicated so that they're no longer a problem. As a result, we have a whole generation that is grown up to rely on drugs. And so then they find out that the drugs that are prohibited actually work much better than the pharmaceutical drugs. They're often more effective. And so they can see no reason not to use those substances.
While autism is not a qualifying medical condition like cancer or severe pain, in Alex's case, the seizures are. His parents give him a liquid form of the drug, and after a few months of treatment, the Eccles say they saw a dramatic improvement.
He went from hitting himself, blooding his face. Within an hour, hour and a half, he would be playing with toys, using his hands, something that at that time was almost unheard of.
They're not advocating the use of medical marijuana for all autistic children, but they say walk a mile in their shoes, and the treatment might not seem so extreme.
Seniors are the fastest growing group taking up pot. A warning, this report does contain drug references.
I don't believe in drugs, but then I've also never been someone who suffered from pain. Marijuana kept me alive.
I've talked to so many people, elders, who said, I never thought I would do anything illegal in my entire life. I'm a little old lady who's followed every rule I've ever heard of. But when my husband was suffering from chemotherapy, I found myself hunting for marijuana. And I had to go across that line to find it. It made me realize that not all the rules are here to protect us. And that sometimes we have to look beyond those boundaries to find what we're actually entitled to have.
And CNN's chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, joins me now. Sanjay, welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, come on, you've been looking at this for a year, and I want to remind you that in 2009, you wrote a Time magazine article entitled Why I Would Vote No on Pot. You've changed your mind.
If you look at all the papers that are written in the United States about marijuana, the vast majority of them are about the harm. that we fund studies on harm. We don't fund studies on benefit nearly as much. So it gives a distorted picture. But you know, I didn't look far enough. I didn't look deep enough. I didn't look at labs in other countries that are doing some incredible research. I didn't listen to the chorus of patients who said, not only does marijuana work for me, it's the only thing that works for me. I took the DEA at their word when they said it's a Schedule I substance and has no medical applications. There was no scientific basis for them to say that. The science is there. This isn't anecdotal. This isn't in the realm of conjecture anymore. I mean, for a long time, we've just ignored these papers, but this was a drug, you know, that was used for thousands of years.